a couple of housekeeping messages. This is the Hyde Park Historical Society in the Chicago Hyde Park Village, Hyde Park Book Club. Tonight we are featuring, or we are happy to welcome Betty Hechtman, who has written a number of different mysteries, a couple of them about Hyde Park. So anyway, I'm going to open the meeting at this point. Betty, are you there? Ready to join us?
The name is there. She's muted.
Right, Betty, you're muted.
Yeah, she's muted.
And you're,
There it goes. Showing now.
Okay, now can you hear me?
we can hear you. Do you want to come on video? Or, yeah.
Oh, why am I not on video? I
don't know.
Do I have to click on something?
You have to click on something that says the.
Oh, okay, I see
the
what it says. All right.
The video button that says.
There, I think
There you are. Hi. I recognize you now from your pictures. Welcome,
I
Betty.
didn't realize that I wasn't on the screen before. I don't know. There's always
Yeah,
something with
well.
computers.
Well, so anyway, I want to welcome you all to the Hyde Park Book Club. Unfortunately, we were unable to do this in person. Betty was ready to fly out here to Chicago to her Hyde Park neighborhood to do this tonight, but with COVID and all that, we decided that it was better to hold off a little while longer and do it via Zoom. So anyway, Betty is the national best-selling author of the Crochet Mysteries, the Yarn Retreat Mysteries, and the Writer for Hire Mysteries, which is what we are featuring tonight, including Murder, Inc. and Righting a Wrong. And she has a new one coming out soon. Betty grew up in Hyde Park and has a degree in fine art from Roosevelt University. Since college, she has studied everything from improv comedy to magic. She has also written newspaper and magazine pieces, short stories, along with several screenplays. She's beginning to sound like her lead character in Murder, Inc. Her first book was a middle grade mystery. I always found this funny. It's called Blue Schwartz and Nefertiti's Necklace, the story of a 13-year-old babysitter who cooked for her charges and had to prove her innocence when she was accused of stealing a priceless necklace. It took place in Hyde Park, where Betty actually did babysit and cook for many neighborhood kids. The next necklace part is all fiction. Betty now splits her time between Southern California and the Hyde Park condo she grew up in. And there are detailed descriptions of that Hyde Park condo in both of her books, along with really fascinating descriptions of 57th Street and the whole Hyde Park neighborhood. It was just a joy to read these books. So anyway, you can learn more about and find excerpts from Betty's books at a website called bettyhechtman.com. So anyway, we welcome you, Betty.
I'm glad to be here, although I'm not really there. I'm in Southern California. I'm like Hyde Park through and through. I was born in Lying In, which was part of Billings Hospital. I went to Ray School. I went to Hyde Park High School. I volunteered at the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club, riding around to playgrounds with the Craftmobile. I went to the First Unitarian Church and was in the children's choir before it was the Chicago Children's Choir. I worked at the co-op. I waited tables at the Medici when it was in the back of a bookstore and several other less memorable places. And I got married at Hill House on Woodlawn, that's on Woodlawn. And then I moved to Southern California, and that was the end of my Hyde Park full-time life. I'm very into location, as you mentioned. You mentioned the detailed descriptions of the apartment. They say you should write what you like, and I like reading about locations. I don't like books where they'll say something like they were driving down Lakeshore Drive, but they don't mention anything about the mood of the lake or what the sky was like or what they see on the other side of the highway or whatever, or that first view you get when you come from the south of the downtown skyline that looks like Oz. So I've always wanted to put a lot of wherever a story takes place. And I do it with, in the Crochet Mysteries, it's kind of easier because Molly happens to live at my house. So, I am able to look around and figure out what's going on pretty easily. The other series, the Yarn Retreat series, takes place on the tip of, well, a slightly sinister hotel and conference center on the tip of the Monterey Peninsula, which it gives me a good reason to go up there and visit. I love going, it's beautiful up there. And the ocean and the coastline and the fictitious small town that I've sort of mixed up from Pacific Grove and Carmel, I try to put a lot of that into the stories as well. And then the Writer for Hire series takes place in Hyde Park and conveniently takes place in the condo which I inherited from my family. So it was we moved in there in 1961. So we've been there a long time. And it was also, I enjoy like describing the neighborhood. And really by living in California and then going back to Chicago, it's made me much more aware of things that I just took for granted when I lived there. Like the fact that we could walk to the beach, which is like now seems like fantastic. When I was a kid, it was no big deal. Or the Museum of Science and Industry was my go-to on Sundays when it was free. And it was like my, my amusement that was always there. Now I realize how special that is. Anyway, the Writer for Hire Mysteries, the basic idea kind of started with my father. My father was a writer and he wrote really strictly nonfiction, and it was all like very serious, but he was very good at doing whatever he had to keep our family afloat. And it turned out that one of the things was actually writing some love letters for a friend of his who was trying to win this very wealthy woman. Anyway, love letters actually worked, and he ended up marrying the woman, and then the guy forgot he knew my father because I guess he served his purpose, whatever. But anyway, so I always, that was always in the back of my mind about the idea of somebody writing love letters for somebody else. And I came up with this character, Veronica Blackstone, who is a writer for hire. She will write pretty much anything, whether it's a celebration of life for a funeral, or she'll help with wedding vows. She'll even write a letter to get you out of your gym membership if need be, or descriptions of flavors of ice cream, colors of paint, pretty much anything is legal. And but doing that kind of writing, she tends to get involved with her clients' lives and their deaths sometimes. She had written a mystery, the first Derek Streeter mystery, which had turned out to be a pretty nice success, but now she's struggling writing the second one because she's worried about it won't measure up to the first one. So she's kind of like stuck with, like, struggling with it. She also runs a writer's workshop out of her apartment, which happens to be, the apartment that I'm very familiar with. And I liked using a lot of the houses in Hyde Park. A lot of them I saw when I was a kid and I was babysitting. And now, thanks to Zillow, I'm able to look at the inside of them all these years later. It's kind of interesting too, because I'll see a place where I have memories of being in that house in that particular spot that they show. And it's sort of, you wonder, like, is there something left behind, of your, like, some vibration of your time of being in that house or whatever. But anyway, so have used the Botany Pond a lot, which was another favorite spot of mine as a kid, and the campus, which was always a nice place to walk, and was a nice place to walk dogs too when I was a kid. Anyway, that's pretty much the story of how Murder Inc. came to be, the idea for the story. I don't name the street that Veronica lives on, but it's kind of a hint that her last name is Blackstone.
We kind of figured that out.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is about Blackstone is Blackstone really hasn't changed. And there are times when I would walk down between 59th and 57th, and I'd get this weird feeling like maybe it was all a dream and I was still 17, because that's 1-2 block area. Other than now, there's one house that they tore down and they built a new house, but it hasn't changed for years. And that's
right. And Blackstone is back to back with Harper, right?
Yes, it goes Harper. What?
Yeah. Well, Blackstone is back to back with Harper, which has got some incredibly old houses on it.
Yes,
So.
the funny thing about Harper too was I took that all for granted when I was a kid. I had friends who lived on there, and it was the book that I have coming out in next month. It's called, God, I can't think of the name of it. Making It Right. Is about somebody who lives in one of the houses on Harper. And when I found out all this interesting information about the houses on Harper that I had never, because it's like when you live someplace, it's just your backdrop. You don't really think about what the places are. And I found out about the houses being, Rosalie's villas, and who Rosalie Buckingham was. And I had a whole new appreciation for those houses. I can actually see the back of them from my place on Blackstone, which is kind of interesting too, to see how close together they are. And the backyards are hardly private. I mean, it's kind of like everything kind of runs together, but
right.
I'm sorry.
And some of those places on Rosalie Villas on Harper, used to look over the World's Columbian Exposition. I mean, that whole area is just so fascinating.
Well, yeah, because there were no train tracks then. The train tracks were level with the ground.
Exactly. And so that you could see all the way to the lake from even probably Blackstone. I don't know that for a fact, but I know for Rosalie Villas you could see from.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been neat.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating area. The Historical Society regularly, or at least in the past, has done several tours of Rosalie Villas up and down Harper Avenue, because out of the, I think, 19 original villas that were built, 18 of them still survive, or something like that. I mean,
really? I didn't know that any were Well, that's true, because some of the houses that I looked at, you could tell were built since. I mean, they were some kind of modern structures.
Right, but most of them are still original. They were built in 1883, and there's only a couple on Harper Avenue that that there's only 1 or 2 teardowns that I know of. So anyway, a fascinating area, but that's different from the story that you're telling us about your mystery books, which were, I was fascinated by the context and by everything that you did with the stories.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, it was, I have a really good memory. And so like I will often in my mind will sort of be someplace else. And I would be, when I was working on the book, I would actually be seeing the places where I thought that, that I was writing about. But I mean, it's funny too, that the building where the Medici was, when it was in the back of the bookstore, when it was the Green Door bookstore, that same location was my nursery school. And then it became the Domino's store. And then, I don't know, there was probably something in between. And then eventually the Medici, and then the Medici took over the whole thing. And then it became Cafe Florian. So it's interesting to me to see the same location with all the changes. Or I
Right.
also walk around too, and because I remember Hyde Park before all the urban renewal, before Harper Square, when the co-op was on 57th Street, and they didn't have the automated things that moved your groceries. They had like a long wooden thing that they would pull, and it would pull the groceries down to the checker.
Right. See, that's before my time, but what interested me about your book was, walking down 57th Street to the little, what you identified as the ice cream shop under the tracks, and then walking up to 53rd, and then walking back to the Reynolds Club. I mean, I'm talking about the second book, Righting a Wrong.
Yeah.
So anyway, so many times I've walked all those spaces and wondered about them. And so you sort of filled in a story about them, which is, wonderful to think
Well,
about that.
it's
So,
kind of like it's largely, I mean, made up. I mean, the place that under the railroad tracks was a coffee place for a while, but I imagined it as being this ice cream place. And the bakery and cafe on 53rd is the old Borders building, which is now IKEA. And I imported a place that's actually in Southern California. There's a family bakery business here that I moved to Chicago, but so I like, I
with,
like,
with the mint cake.
right,
too?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, they're known for cakes, but the mint cake, that was, I made up too. So, and then I realized, some of my books have recipes in them and patterns for crochet or knit things or whatever. So when I was writing the book, I was thinking about the recipe for the mint cake, but I didn't have to put a recipe in there. So it was kind of made up, but I imagined that she used mint candy, like hard candies for the flavor that was so different. So,
Yeah. Carol, you're muted. I can see you're saying something. Carol, unmute yourself.
I don't think she's saying anything. Are you saying anything?
Carol, no, Carol is saying something. Carol Beef. Carol, unmute yourself, Carol. Can you hear me, Carol? Yes, because she's obviously into it.
Yeah, Carol, I don't think we can hear you.
Carol? Well, she's not hearing us, but.
Okay, I lost
Oh,
the screen completely. I was interested in your resurrecting kitty kicks.
Oh,
That was
I
that
love
was a lot of fun.
Oh, well, I loved going there when I was a kid. And the coolest thing was when I took my son there and bought him shoes there. I was so sorry to see that go with a cow jumping over the moon and all that. And it was interesting too, because online I found other people talking about kitty kicks and they remembered things that I didn't remember. I hadn't remembered the things that I can't think what they're called, but the shoe salesman would sit on them and you put your foot on them and they look like elephants. But yeah, that was, there were a lot of cool stores in Hyde Park that are like gone that I remember.
So Betty, I have a question for you because I've only read your Hyde Park series, which is 2 so far and 1 coming out next month. But you've obviously been writing mysteries for a long time. So how do you do it? I mean, you've been sort of cranking them out for a while.
I sort of, when I get the first line, then if I can get the first line, I sort of feel like I know where I'm going, and I start with an idea, especially after I've written a couple of books in a series. It's like I come up with an arc for all the different characters, like what's going to happen to them during the book, aside from the mystery. And the mystery, usually it's when I'm rewriting that it kind of gets straightened out, because when I'm doing the first go through, it's kind of all over the place. And I guess it's just how I think, you know, I think, not that I think about killing people or anything, but um, uh, just, I do think about weird ways of killing people. I mean, the last crochet book that came out about a year ago, the person died, a drone dropped a bag of garbage on them and killed them. So I'm not really a very violent person. In fact, I can't even really watch too violent shows. They're kind of disturbing to me. I like to think that my books are dead bodies, but everybody has a good time. So they tend to be lighter.
Yeah. Well, certainly I appreciated that because I'm not a violent person either. And when your character gets into what could be a very violent situation, it usually resolves fairly non-violently. And I appreciate that because I don't like a lot of gore. Although the tension is interesting. So.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with cozy mysteries in general, is that there isn't any gore or anything, you know, too, everything is kind of off screen. And I like to have my characters rescue themselves. I don't really want to have somebody come like riding in and you know, on a white horse and taking care of things for them. So it is a bit of a challenge about how to figure out how to get them out of trouble sometimes. So.
Well, you've done it often enough, so it's certainly.
Has to be a new
So,
way each time, though.
Yeah. At this point, we can open it up. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know. I've just read the two books, as I said, Righting a Wrong and Murder, Inc. And I'm looking forward to reading some of the other mysteries, the Crochet Mysteries, because I do love a mystery. But I'm interested in anybody else's comments at this point.
I have a comment. I really like the way she would throw in, well, this is what a writer's supposed to do to get the information. So I'll do that. I can't think of the best example on that, you know, right now, but I also liked her first, I think it was her first assignment in the book, and that was to have people come and pick up animals, cats. And she started writing the description of the animal. My name is Rocky and I'm looking for forever home. And she kept on going. And then she looked at the picture and she said, well, it looked like I'd succeeded at my assignment. I haven't even finished writing the piece and Rocky had found his home. And she takes Rocky home with her. I just love that story in here. And that kind of typifies also how she would go about it. She'd have the animal right there, be looking at the animal, the picture, and write from there. And I too, I've taken writing classes and that's what they tell you. You know, go there and write what you're writing about while you're there. Don't remember it and then write.
That's kind of based on sort of a true story. Rocky really was my cat. And the way we got him was my son and I had gone out for lunch and there was a SPCA place in the shopping mall where we were. And my son had noticed it. And at that point, we've always had cats and dogs. And I think at that point, we didn't have any cats. We had dogs, one dog, I think then. So we went to look at in the window of the SPCA place, and Rocky was in the window and literally looking at us, and he put his paw out as if to say, take me, but they were closed. So we went back the next day, and it turned out that Rocky had they called a sister who looked nothing like him and was 3 years older than he was. So I guess they meant like housemate. Anyway, he was 7 and she was 10, and somebody had just left them at the SPCA. They had moved them to the shopping center location because they thought they would have a better chance of being adopted, which they were, and they can't, and he was the best cat. I mean, just the most affectionate, sweet cat. And we got him when he was, like I said, he was like 7. And his big thing was he used to like to sit on my head. But actually, there are a lot of animals in my books, and pretty much all of them are based on animals that either I've had or known. There's only one dog which I made up, and I kept thinking that that dog would show up, because I've had dogs show up in front of my house that we just take in, and they live here forever. But that particular dog so far has never showed up, so I don't know.
So that proves exactly right what I thought and what I said, that not only do your characters, does this writer in the book write from her experience when she's there, but also the real author of the book has these things from your experience, and that's why they're so powerful in whatever they're trying to do. And I just thought this book was so great. I read the
Thank you.
White Wine Murder Inc. And I just thought it was fantastic. So many different things in there, and hints, and things I might have known before about writing, but by seeing again, okay, it refreshes my memory, and I have the explanation. So, I feel like saying thank you for sharing these methods with us.
Well, thank you for thanking me.
All right. So Betty, can you share a little bit about what's in your next installation of Writer for Hire?
Okay, in this one, actually, okay, the art fair gets mentioned in this one. She gets involved with a memoir for the wife of like a semi-famous artist who paints pictures of Scotty dogs with whimsical backgrounds. And he is discovered at the community art fair, not the other art fair, by a influencer, and the influencer happens to have a Scotty dog that looks just like the one in the paintings, and so she uses the paintings in her YouTube videos, and that's how he becomes famous. And she also sells a lot of merchandise connected with the dog pictures. I have a little story actually about the community art fair, which I was just thinking about recently. When I was in college, I used to sew a real lot, and I had made a whole bunch of purses and scarves that I had designed and sewed and everything. And I thought I would get into the 57th Street Art Fair. So when you had to like bring samples of your work to be accepted in the art fair. Well, apparently the woman who in charge didn't feel it was enough of an art, and so I was rejected. She said if I had woven the fabric, maybe they would have let me in. Anyway, I was broke at the time, so I really needed to sell these things. So the art fair, 57th Street Art Fair happened, and I set up across Kenwood by Bixler Playground. And first I had a table, and then I had like this box that I hung on myself, and I had the purses on my shoulders and all the things in the box and everything. Well, the woman who rejected me was not happy with what I was doing, and she came over and she threatened to turn the police on me because I was peddling without a license. So the police drove by and they totally ignored me. Anyway, I sold all my stuff, which she probably would have made her more upset. And then I had nothing to do with it, but eventually the next year there were more people who set up themselves on 57th Street on the other side of Kenwood, and eventually it became the community art fair. So it's like,
Really? That's an amazing story.
yeah,
It really is.
it was, I didn't realize it until years later how, I mean, not that, as I said, I didn't have anything to do with putting together the community art fair, but then it was great because anybody who wanted would, you didn't have to pass this woman's judgment to be in the art fair. Anyway, I used that. I didn't tell the whole story in the book. I just mentioned that he was in the community art fair, that they had been rejected because the paintings were too much fun to be in the regular art fair.
We're serious enough.
Well, that's funny because I was just at, a good friend of mine, Judith Heinemann, was at the community art fair selling her earrings and things that she had done during the pandemic, and they weren't the kind of thing for the 57th Street Art Fair, but she had her little booth set up in the community art fair, and you meet a lot of interesting people there. So
Yes.
I'm just floored that you got that thing going, because it's always, at least the past few years, it's been sort of a pairing where you go to one and then you go to the other and you have a nice experience at both.
Right. Yeah, well, the community art fair, well, it's funny because there was an artist who, she made prints. I mean, she made like, I can't remember whether they were, she sold things very reasonably too. And I think she might have even been in the regular art fair and then got pushed out, and she ended up being in the community art fair. And a lot of other people too, who I thought they did very lovely stuff, but apparently they were not accepted into the official art fair. But I mean, I grew up with the art fair because my father wrote art books, and we were friends with a lot of neighborhood artists and everything who would hang their, I remember when they would hang them on Ray School's like fence. And that was long before me.
And Betty, that brings up another question that we were discussing among ourselves, which is your parents. I mean, you grew up in Hyde Park. What did your parents do in Hyde Park? What was your background?
My father went to the University of Chicago and just never left. And so he was, as I said, a writer, but to keep our family afloat, he became a high school English teacher at Englewood High School. And he tried to write when he wasn't working, which I guess was kind of hard for him. But he also was in charge of the yearbook there. And my mother was a secretary. She worked a lot of places. She worked at Armour, I don't want to say
IIT.
No, Armour. It's like meat packing or the old
Armour.
stockyard.
All right. Yeah.
And then she also worked, there was a social agency that used to be on 57th and Blackstone, where the Lanehoff Dance School became later. And eventually she became a school secretary, and she worked at Oakenwald School, which was, I realize now is gone. I worked there one summer too, in Head Start. It was like at 42nd and right by the railroad tracks. But they were very connected with, as I said, a lot of artists and writers in the neighborhood. My father had been a roommate with Emil Arman when they lived in this building called the Kurdish Council that was on Harper near 57th, and there were just people that did pottery.
What was the name of it again? What was the name of it again?
The Kurdish Council. I mean, that's what they called it.
The Kurdish Council. Yes. We have. I have a picture of that place. Yeah.
Okay.
It was.
Yeah.
It was torn down in the early 60s, right?
Yes, when they did urban renewal. And then actually
Right.
the first building we lived in was at 57th and Dorchester. And only recently I never knew that it had a name. It was called the Geneva Apartments. And it
Really?
was on 57th and went around the corner. There were like 2 entrances on 57th and I think 2 entrances on Dorchester. And I thought that it had been a hotel because all the rooms in our apartment were the same size. I mean, the kitchen, the dining room, they were, except for the living room was like a double room. But I guess, so I don't know if it was built for the World's Fair or not, but it was an interesting building. That also had a lot of interesting people living there, artists, and because rent was cheap in those days. But somebody on the Hyde Park Classics, oh, I can't think of her name. She writes a lot of histories about Hyde Park.
I think she's on.
What?
Yeah, I think she's here. Trish,
Oh.
Patricia Morse.
Yes. Because
Trish, do you want to come on, Trish?
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm busy doing stuff, so I'll be invisible.
yeah, I think that Patricia was the one who posted the picture of the Geneva apartments, and it was like, it was amazing to see it, because it was like with the picture there was nothing around it. You couldn't see, you know, couldn't see it in context, but I definitely recognized it.
I like the way she edits herself as she's talking and catches herself up when she's talking what she thinks is a cliche.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
quickly think of anything different. I like that.
Well, I started, you know, that made me interested in cliches and like where they came from and stuff. It's really fascinating with words. I mean, you know, things that you say all the time, you don't even think about. And then all of a sudden you start wondering like what the origin of what it was. So I got like a book on idioms and cliches, and I started reading about it. And it's, you know, it's really easy to talk in cliches too, because they do get the point across really easily and quickly. But
Right. And I was thinking of that because my husband's family is from Iraq, and they came over here in 2011. And I was trying to talk to them about how to integrate themselves into this country, because they had good English, but what they didn't have was any idioms. So they were losing half of the conversation all the time, because in your books you call them cliches, but from an immigrant's point of view, or for somebody who's not a native English speaker, they're idioms, they're parts of the language that tell what the language is, that tell stories. And so I kept telling my nephew, you have to learn English idioms if you're going to understand this culture. So anyway, I always laughed when I got in your books and you were saying you were so dead set against cliches, and then you just kept saying, but they say what you need to say. They cut right to the chase. Yeah, so that was great.
There's a question, I think, in the chat. A question for Betty.
Yes. When you were growing up, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, when I was really young. Well, for one thing, that's one of the things my father taught me about writing and about rejection. I mean, which is always a good thing to know. I think I wrote my first story when I was around maybe 10. We had this property in Indiana, which I actually still have, that I just loved going there. It was out in the country, because, you know, growing up in Hyde Park, we lived in an apartment all the time. So it was being out and where there was like just openness like that. Anyway, I wrote this story about these two fairies that lived in the mailbox that we had. It was one of those rural loaf-shaped mailboxes. And I don't know, I don't think it didn't go anyplace, but it was my first story. It was really all I ever wanted to be, was a writer. It just took me a long time to kind of get it together. And I also, I wrote in my college newspaper, I wrote a column, and I wrote some newspapers and, you know, magazine things afterwards, but it took a while before the fiction kicked in with the mysteries.
Do people who buy your books can you tell, is it a national thing, people from all over?
You mean are my readers from all over?
Yes.
I Yeah, they are from all over. I mean, I don't, I get things by email, so they don't necessarily tell me, if they go through my website, they don't tell me where they are. But I've had things where, I've sent, sent out bookmarks or whatever, and they've been pretty much everywhere. I don't know about how much. Well, I mean, the company that's putting out the Writer for Hire books is actually in the UK, so I apparently have readers there, because I believe that they sell a lot to libraries there, which I think is kind of interesting. And it was when I was writing the book, since it was a UK company, I was wondering if I had to use words like, boot instead of trunk for the car and everything, but I decided just to go all American, let them figure it out.
Right. Well, that's interesting that your publisher is UK, because, I mean, certainly there is a traditional old, I won't say English, but, well, certainly a traditional mystery feel to what you do in terms of plot development and character development that would probably appeal to the UK as well as people here in the United States.
Well, I think also with Amazon now, because it's all over the world, people all over the place, they don't, a book doesn't have to be released in a foreign country for people to have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we all read Agatha Christie.
Right.
So, and we wanted in that English, British English.
Right.
Because that's where she was. And so we liked that aspect of it too. So I'm sure they liked the American language aspect of this in Britain.
Well, yeah, and it would seem pretty weird if I was writing about Chicago and started using, like, calling the parking lot car parks and like I said, boots for trunks and everything, or the tube instead of the L.
Yeah. Well, sure, if you're in Chicago.
Yeah,
The
right.
story's in Chicago. So how did you get, how did that, that printing company happen to take your book on?
My agent had sent it to them, so
Oh, okay.
that's pretty much how.
So he thought it would be it was good for some business reasons. I don't know why, but.
Yeah, well, the editor that I had, what he liked, because I had used gaslighting in the first book, and somehow that touched a nerve with that particular editor, so that was one of the reasons they went with it. But the first book, the kids book, although I had an agent, that I had to sell myself. I had to find a publisher for it, and I kept thinking, because it took place in Hyde Park, I thought, somebody in Chicago would be interested and so forth, and nobody in the Midwest was interested with it, but a woman whose publishing company finally bought it was in Connecticut, but she had a Chicago connection, and she knew the Oriental Institute, and she knew Hyde Park and everything, and so it touched a nerve with her. But
yeah, so I guess we have renown there, intellectual renown with the University of Chicago, and of course, a lot deeper than that, but that's an example.
Why did you decide to write mysteries?
I think when I was a kid and I read Nancy Drew and Agatha Christie, I thought, I thought it was like really like, I thought it was confusing. I wondered how I'd ever figure out how to do the clues and everything, but I really liked reading the book so much that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to write them. It seems like a lot of mystery writers started with Nancy Drew's and Agatha Christie's.
But what do you have to do in order to actually write a mystery? I mean, what is the process?
Well, one thing I learned is that you're actually, you have a number of stories going on. There's what you're showing to the reader, but there's also what really happened, like, how the murder happened and what's happening in the background. And you sort of have to drop Well, I mean, how the murder happened, usually I don't have to really explain until the end, because then usually there's a whole thing where everything's, all the pieces are put together. But it's, you have to kind of have it going in your mind about what really happened and what's going on while you're, it's kind of like magic. I mean, some of it's distraction too. Like, you know, you're distracting people with one thing while you're like throwing a clue in, hoping they won't really get the clue.
Right, and I certainly appreciated that in Murder Inc. because several times you pointed out at the dance club about how people were throwing things in their cubby hole, but didn't really dwell on that. But in fact, that was the key to how the murderer actually got access to the information about the two people that she was gaslighting. I mean, to me, that was what it kept sticking in my mind. You know, she said cubbyhole 2 or 3 times, but I didn't get it until quite near the end of the book. So,
Well, I mean, there are like certain tricks which work even if you know the tricks. Like one of the things, if you have a list of things, you stick something in the middle of the list that's a clue. And even though I know that, when I read stuff and there's a list of stuff, it still goes right past me. But, or you put something in before you know, the whole thing is about things being out of order. Before you know what's going to happen, if you put clues in, nobody thinks about it being a clue. They don't even pay attention to it necessarily. And then, you have to play fair, not put things in like things they couldn't possibly know. And it's kind of like a fine line about, playing fair, but being too open, obvious about who did what.
Right. And that was Agatha Christie's thing always, was she always insisted that she had the clues there if the reader wanted to find them, and you could go back and track them as you can with your books. I feel that, and another thing is the fact that in your books, the murders happen either before the story starts or very early in the story. So you're moving forward from that point.
Yeah, well, that's kind of, especially with the crochet books, those were with Penguin and also with another publisher, Crooked Lane. But my editors were very insistent about the murder had to happen at a certain point, in the early part of the book. If you pretty much by page 50, although I've gone a little bit beyond that. But it's kind of like you can't wait too long, or you have to put something in the beginning that there's going to be a murder. So so it's not, so people are like, no, something's going to happen. But it never, it never gets easy. It's like I'm kind of amazed. It's like 27 books, but it's still, every time when I look at that screen the first time, it's like, am I going to be able to write this?
Even if you know the characters so well by that point?
Well, that makes it easier because, it's like they kind of have their own lives going on in my head. So they're talking to each other and so forth and doing things. It makes it, but still the mystery part and like, who's going to die. I have to figure that one out and how they're going to die. And
Have you ever had an extended period of where writer's block?
Well, no, because back to my father. My father had this thing where he had to have a perfect place to write. He had, and my mother was forever trying to find that perfect place for him, which it turned out didn't really exist. But anyway, because he was so concerned about having just the right place to write, I decided that I would be able to write anywhere. And so my house is always chaotic. There's always animals and people and stuff going on here. And I just pretty much, if I get stuck, what I'll do is I'll go to a yellow tablet, like a legal pad, and handwrite for a while, because that's different than typing. but and sometimes, yeah, I mean, there are times when I look at what I'm writing and think, oh my God, this is horrible. But I keep hearing the voice in my head to say, keep going, because if you keep going, you can always rewrite it. But if you don't keep going, you have nothing to rewrite. So I'm able to push myself to keep going.
Is there anything like a association of cozy mystery writers?
Well, there's Sisters in Crime. I belong to Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America, but there's not really, actually, cozy mystery writers are kind of like dissed by all the, the tough guys that write the dark stuff. There's also an organization or is a conference they put on BoucherCon, which the cozy mystery writers are kind of dissed at quite a bit. But I don't think there's an organization that's just cozy mystery writers. I mean, I have friends. I know a lot of cozy mystery writers, but we don't have our own organization.
That sounds like a project.
Yeah, it probably could be. I mean, because cozy mysteries have become very popular, and there are jokes that people make about them because there's usually a small town, and most of my titles are like kind of punny titles and everything, which after a while can get kind of like, I guess, tedious to people too. But as I said, but people do make light of them. But the point is they're supposed to be light mysteries, and people enjoy them. So.
Do you know Hyde Park's other mystery writer, Sarah Feretsky?
Well, I've met her once. She lives down the street from my place. But I mean, her books are a little darker than mine. I think we actually have been at the Printers Row Book Fair together.
Right. Well, I've read a fair number of mysteries, and to me, there are. I mean, I'm thinking Sarah Feretsky is one. You're another. Dick Francis. I don't know. Many people know him, but there are gradations of how injured the main character gets when you get to the final scene where you have the denouement, where somebody is confronted and either the main character ends up in the hospital like some of the James Bond movies, or the main character simply gets out with a mild scratch like yours or Sarah Feretsky's, which are somewhere in the middle where the main character might get a little injured but not seriously damaged. I mean, there are gradations of all this. And I prefer the cozy mysteries personally. I don't like seeing people get hurt. So that's.
Well, yeah, they're happier to write than I think. Well, it's also, it's what you have your mind on too, because when I was, I used to sew a lot, and when I would be sewing and working on something, I would sort of be telling myself stories. And one time I told myself this story that was it had this, like, you couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. And it got me so upset just telling myself the story that I had to just like end it because it was bothering me. And I mean, if I was writing something really dark and I was thinking about that all the time, I think that would probably bother me too. So this way, because they are kind of light books, it's like my mother used to say, it's like you can read them and your heart isn't palpitating so you can go to sleep afterwards.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yes. So,
Betty,
do we have any?
a while ago, you said something that will resonate in my head for a long, long time. You said, the voices in my head. Listen to the voices in my head. And for me, this has been a wonderful session. The time we've spent here, it's been so neighborly with you, so intimate. And now for you to mention, listen to the voices in your head. That's something that will be with me for a long, long time. So thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
Yes,
By the way, I
say
don't
that
know,
also.
I don't know if you know Sam Gard. Sam is our local, how old is it now, Sam? 93, 94?
96, my dear.
Wow.
And
Oh, Jesus. I've blown a few years of
I
your
was
life away.
born the year previous to Lindy, Charles Lindbergh flying the ocean.
Wow.
So anyway, Sam is our, and by the way, Sam is also the father of 2 authors himself. So he knows a little bit about writing. And so Sam, it's always great to see you at our meetings.
I just had the
So,
caption. My
anybody-
cat is about to walk on the computer. This cat, this is one of the only cats. She hasn't been in a book yet, so she's trying to work her way into getting into one.
Oh, okay.
Well, she knew you were having a book club meeting, so she said, give me a shot at it. I'll audition tonight.
Sure, looks all
Does
black.
she have an agent? Does she have an agent?
Yeah. Yeah, no, she has a little white. She has a little white on her tummy.
Okay.
She's
Oh, yeah, I see.
a little cat.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah. No, she's
Oh,
all of our animals have like showed up at the front door, or been she would belong to my son, and he moved home and brought her with him. So our dogs have been rescues of one sort or another.
Well, Betty, all we can see right now is her tail wagging behind your head. Anyway, so anybody have any more questions for Betty? Betty, this has been a wonderful evening. We've all enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, great. So any other questions? All right, well, thank you everybody for coming tonight, and thank you, Betty, for
thank you for inviting me.
really this wonderful discussion. And I will be sending out the next Hyde Park Book Club announcements to everybody in the near future. We've got a lot of interesting things coming up. Dottie, could you give us a quick update on that, or aren't you prepared? I'm sorry, I'm not. Unmute yourself, Dottie. Dottie, unmute.
I'm trying, Michael. I'm trying, and I did it.
All right. There you
So
go.
on Monday, August 15th, the guest author will be Deborah Cohen, who's head of the history department at Northwestern. She's the author of the book published this year, The Last Call at the Hotel Shanghai, a nonfiction work that's fascinating about a number of journalists who were covering Europe between the wars. She got the idea for the book while doing some research in special collections. And the idea that she came upon there morphed into this wonderful book that's been very well received. So we're pleased about her. And then on Monday, September 19th, another Northwestern professor and author, Bill Savage, will be the discussant for a book called A Time for Frankie Coulin, a novel authored by Bill Granger. And Bill Savage feels this is a terrific and underrated book. So he's very happy to be joining us as discussant. And then in November, to wrap up 2022, Jeff Deutsch will be the guest to discuss his book about the spirit and legacy of independent bookstores.
Right.
And Jeff
Called
Deutsch, as
Increase-
most of you know, is the managing director of Seminary Co-op Bookstore. And he's actually gone on a European book tour. By then, he will have returned from Europe.
So anyway, our Hyde Park Book Club is going off in a lot of different directions. But always coming back to Hyde Park, which is what we're all about. So anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you so much, Betty. And I hope when you come back this fall, we can all get together. at
That'd be
some
great.
point.
Yes, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so thank you for
Yeah.
joining us. And we will have this session recorded and published on our website at some time in the near future. So anyway, good
Over and
night,
out from my
everybody.
rooftop.
Good
Good
night.
night.
All right, good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betty.
Oh, thank you.